Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. I'm your host, guiding you through cases that have moved through the courts and left the public divided. In this episode, imagine this. You are a loving mother, but behind closed doors, you are orchestrating a tragedy that no one could ever fathom. This is what happened with Lacey Spears, a mother who manipulated her son's health for attention, leading to devastating consequences. Join me now as we unravel the case of Lacey Spears, where the lines between maternal devotion and manipulation blur, raising the question, was she a victim of her own psychological struggles or a calculated perpetrator of a heinous crime? Let's get into it. Lacey Spears' case raises profound moral and ethical questions about the nature of maternal instincts and the lengths to which some individuals will go for attention. Was she driven by a mental illness that distorted her perception of reality, or was her behavior a calculated act of manipulation? This case, it makes us confront the uncomfortable truth that behind the facade of a loving mother, there absolutely can lie a darker, more troubling reality. Imagine being in Lacey's position, desperate for sympathy and validation. The pressure to be seen as a devoted caregiver can sometimes lead individuals to extreme measures. For Lacey, the tragedy of her son Garrett's illness became intertwined with her own identity, and it began to blur the lines between nurturing and manipulation for her own gain or comfort or attention. As we explore her case, we must ask ourselves, how does the need for attention impact parental behavior? And we know it does. In Lacey's case, the phenomenon known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy comes into play. This psychological disorder leads caregivers to intentionally induce illness in those they care for in order to garner sympathy and attention. Lacey's actions exemplify this disturbing behavior, raising questions about her mental state and whether she understood the gravity of her actions. Did her actions stem from a genuine need for validation? Or was she aware of the harm she was inflicting on her child? Furthermore, we need to consider the societal implications of Lacey's behavior. When a caregiver becomes a source of harm, how should society respond? This case is not just about one mother's choices. It challenges us to confront our beliefs about mental health and accountability. Should individuals with mental illness who harm others receive compassion, or should they face the full consequences of their actions? As we delve deeper into Lacey's story, it becomes evident that her case highlights the failures of a system that sometimes overlooks mental health needs until it is too late. Many argue the proper interventions could have prevented Garnett's tragic fate. If mental health professionals had been involved earlier, could they have identified Lacey's behaviors as indicative of Munchausen syndrome by proxy? And this brings us to the heart of the dilemma. How do we differentiate between a patient's genuine love and a harmful obsession with illness? The complexity of Lacey's case forces us to grapple with the uncomfortable truth that sometimes those who are supposed to protect us, they can also inflict the deepest harm. As we examine the evidence and the court findings, we must ask ourselves, what is the appropriate balance between empathy for a mother struggling with mental illness and accountability for her actions? Additionally, we should reflect on the legal implications of Lacey's actions. If her behavior was indeed driven by a psychological disorder, how does that influence the legal system's response? Should she receive leniency because of her mental illness, or is accountability paramount, regardless of the underlying issues? This tension between compassion and justice is a recurring theme in cases involving mental health. We've talked about it before here. Ultimately, Lacey Spears' story serves as a reminder of the complexities surrounding motherhood and mental illness, and the societal expectations placed on caregivers. As we navigate this case, consider where you draw the line between compassion for a struggling mother and the need for justice for her child. And the fact that there's a child involved, it affects people and it affects their decisions. What does it mean for a society to protect its most vulnerable members when the threat comes from those they trust the most? As we unravel the details of this tragic story, reflect on the implications of Lacey's actions. Was she a victim of her own psychological struggles, or a calculated perpetrator of a heinous crime? The answers may be more complicated than they appear. Lacey Spears, a New York mother, was convicted of murdering her son, Garnett, by poisoning him with excessive sodium levels. The tragic circumstances leading to Garnett's death began years earlier, as he experienced a series of alarming health issues from a young age. His frequent hospitalizations for gastrointestinal problems and failure to thrive raised red flags among medical professionals who began to suspect that his symptoms may not have been entirely genuine. Lacey's involvement in her son's medical care was both intense and obsessive. She often sought multiple opinions from doctors, pushing for extensive testing and treatments, which led some medical personnel to question her motives. Her behavior exemplified a concerning pattern where the mother appeared to thrive on the attention and sympathy she garnered from hospital staff and friends during Garnett's various health crises. In January of 2014, after exhibiting severe symptoms, Garnett was taken to the hospital once again. Medical tests revealed dangerously high sodium levels in his blood, suggesting intentional poisoning. As investigations unfolded, authorities discovered that Lacey had been administering sodium through a feeding tube, ultimately leading to Garnett's tragic death just days later. Witnesses noted Lacey's hypervigilance and the way she actively sought attention during Garnett's hospital stays, further raising suspicions about her involvement. Investigators found evidence of extensive online searches related to sodium poisoning, indicating that Lacey had researched ways to manipulate medical situations in order to gain sympathy. The media quickly became captivated by the case, as it highlighted the complexities of child abuse intertwined with mental illness. Lacey Spears was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, prompting a closer examination of her motivations. The prosecution argued that Lacey had intentionally harmed her son out of a psychological need for attention, presenting evidence of her online searches and manipulative behavior. In her defense, Lacey portrayed herself as a loving mother who wanted only the best for her son, and she claimed Garnett's health issues were real and that she never, ever intended to harm him. This defense aimed to paint Lacey as a devoted parent caught in a tragic situation, rather than a calculated murderer. As the trial progressed, the prosecution focused on establishing a timeline of Lacey's actions leading up to Garnett's death. They presented evidence that highlighted her pattern of seeking medical attention for her son, often exaggerating or fabricating his symptoms to keep him in the medical spotlight. Medical professionals testified about their growing concerns regarding Lacey's behavior, indicating that her need for attention had become increasingly alarming. The prosecution introduced psychological evaluations that revealed Lacey's possible motivations, suggesting that her actions were influenced by a need for sympathy and recognition. They argued that her behavior reflected characteristics associated with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, where caregivers inflict harm on their dependents to gain attention for themselves. This phenomenon complicated the narrative, as it blurred the lines between mental illness and criminal intent. In contrast, the defense maintained that Lacey was a caring mother who only wanted the best for Garnett. They argued that her actions were rooted in a desperate desire to help her son, not harm him. The defense attempted to shift the focus away from Lacey's intentions, suggesting that her behavior stemmed from a genuine fear for Garnett's health rather than a need for attention. Throughout the trial, the jury faced the daunting task of weighing Lacey's mental state against the evidence of her actions. The complexity of her case highlighted the challenges in trying to distinguish between a psychological disorder and criminal behavior. The court also had to consider whether Lacey's mental health influenced her decisions and whether that should mitigate her culpability. As the prosecution and defense presented their arguments, the media coverage intensified, drawing public attention to the issues of mental health, parental responsibility, and child protection. Lacey's case sparked discussions about the adequacy of mental health interventions and the responsibility of medical professionals to recognize and address potential cases of abuse masquerading as care, something very hard to do. Ultimately, the outcome of Lacey Spears' trial would not only determine her fate, but also serve as a pivotal moment in the conversation about those intersections of motherhood, mental illness, and accountability. And as the trial unfolded, the prosecution focused on establishing a pattern of behavior that suggested Lacey's actions were intentional and they were premeditated. Testimonies from various medical professionals painted a troubling picture of a mother who, rather than seeking to heal her son, seemed to derive satisfaction from the attention that Garnett's illnesses garnered for her. Experts in psychology discussed how children with Munchausen syndrome by proxy often exhibit symptoms of illness as a direct result of their caregiver's influence. This information became pivotal in the prosecution's argument that Lacey's actions were not only harmful, they were calculated. Evidence was also presented regarding Lacey's behavior in the hospital. Medical records indicated that she would frequently exaggerate Garnett's symptoms or request unnecessary procedures. Staff members recalled feeling uneasy about her intense involvement and the lengths she would go to ensure that her son remained in the hospital setting, where she could maintain her role as the concerned mother. Lacey's digital footprint, it also came into inspection. Investigators uncovered a series of internet searches related to sodium poisoning, as well as articles on medical conditions that mirrored Garnett's symptoms. The prosecution argued that these searches indicated forethought. They also indicated knowledge, and that challenged Lacey's claims of innocence. They contended that a true caregiver would not research ways to harm their child, suggesting that her actions were driven by a desperate need for attention and sympathy. Well, in defense, Lacey's legal team sought to portray her a little bit differently. They wanted everyone to see her as a victim of circumstance, a mother, a loving mother, whose mental health struggles just clouded her judgment, and they argued that her obsessive behavior was rooted in genuine concern for Garnett's well-being rather than malicious intent. The defense attempted to highlight inconsistencies in the prosecution's narrative, suggesting the medical community had failed to provide the necessary support and intervention for Lacey during her times of crisis. The emotional weight of this case, it was very heavy in the courtroom, with Garnett's tragic story resonating deeply with the jurors and observers alike. The prosecution emphasized the loss of an innocent child, while the defense implored the jury to consider the complexities of mental illness and that fine line between caregiving and harm. As the trial drew to a close, both sides prepared their final arguments, underscoring the dual narratives of a mother struggling with mental health issues and a child who suffered as a consequence of that struggle. The jury was left to grapple with the difficult questions of accountability, intention, and the appropriate response to an individual whose actions were deeply influenced by their psychological state. In their closing arguments, the prosecution reiterated the pattern of manipulation that characterized Lacey's behavior throughout Garnett's life. They emphasized the medical evidence that supported their claims of intentional poisoning, framing Lacey's actions as those of a mother who prioritized her own needs for attention over the welfare of her own child. The emotional impact of Garnett's death was a central theme as the prosecution urged the jury to remember the innocence lost due to Lacey's choices. Conversely, the defense maintained that Lacey was not a monster. She was a mother grappling with severe mental health issues, and they argued that her obsession with her son's health stemmed from a genuine belief that he was unwell. The defense called upon mental health professionals to testify about Lacey's psychological state, asserting that her behavior was not driven by malice, but rather by an untreated mental illness that could cloud her judgment. The jury faced a very difficult decision as they deliberated this case. They had to weigh the evidence of Lacey's actions against the context of her mental health struggles. Would they view her as manipulative, as a mother who is manipulating her own son and causing harm? Or is she a victim of her circumstances, influenced by a profound psychological disorder? The outcome here hinged not only on Lacey's actions, but also on how the jury interpreted the motivations behind those actions. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, and Lacey Spears was found guilty of second-degree murder. And this verdict shocked many, sparking widespread discussion about the implications of the case. While some viewed the decision as a necessary step toward justice for Garnett, others felt it was highlighted by a failure to understand the complexities of mental health and the challenges faced by caregivers like Lacey. Following the verdict, Lacey's sentencing drew even more attention. The court had to grapple with the balance between accountability and compassion. The prosecution argued for a lengthy prison sentence, emphasizing the need to send a message that child abuse would not be tolerated, regardless of the circumstances. Meanwhile, the defense sought a more lenient sentence, advocating for mental health treatment rather than punishment. They argued that Lacey's actions were not purely criminal, but rather they were a manifestation of her untreated mental illness. Ultimately, the court sentenced Lacey Spears to 20 years in prison. The decision ignited debate among mental health advocates and legal experts and the public about how best to handle cases involving mental illness and crime. This case became a pivotal moment in discussions surrounding parental responsibility, mental health, and the complexities of caregiving. In the case of Lacey Spears, the courtroom became a battleground for two contrasting narratives. The prosecution's argument centered on the claim that Lacey intentionally harmed her son, driven by a psychological need for attention. They highlighted the evidence of her online searches related to sodium poisoning and her pattern of exaggerating Garnett's medical issues. According to the prosecution, these behaviors painted a picture of a mother who would stop at nothing to keep herself in the spotlight, even if it meant putting her child's life at risk. The prosecution presented testimonies from medical professionals who had treated Garnett. They described Lacey's obsessive behavior and her relentless pursuit of medical interventions. These witnesses explained how her actions raised suspicions about the authenticity of Garnett's illnesses. The prosecution argued that Lacey's need for sympathy and attention outweighed any genuine concern for her son's well-being, thus constituting a form of abuse. Conversely, the defense framed Lacey as a loving mother, overwhelmed by her son's health challenges, and they contended that her behavior was not indicative of malice, but again, a manifestation of an untreated mental illness. Mental health experts testified on that side to the complexities of Lacey's psychological state, arguing that her obsessive care stemmed from her genuine belief that Garnett was suffering, and they highlighted the need for compassion and understanding, suggesting that Lacey was caught in a web of her psychological struggles rather than acting with intent to harm. As all the arguments unfolded, the courtroom became a reflection of the broader issues here surrounding mental health and parenting. The prosecution and the defense both presented compelling cases, but the jury had to navigate the complexities of Lacey's situation while also considering the impact of her actions on little Garnett's life. For the jury, as deliberations would continue, the emotional toll became evident. Many were struck by the tragedy of Garnett's death, while others grappled with the complexities of Lacey's motivations. In the end, this case prompted significant discussions about the accountability of caregivers and the need for better mental health support systems. Ultimately, this case serves as a reminder of the delicate balance that we have to face between compassion and accountability. These arguments presented in court reflect broader issues, broader questions about how we treat individuals that are struggling, particularly those in caregiving roles. The case challenges us to consider how we can protect vulnerable individuals while also ensuring that those who commit harm are responsible for their actions. Lacey Spears' case epitomizes the ongoing debate surrounding mental illness, accountability, and the complexities of caregiving. The central controversy here revolves around how society perceives individuals who commit harm while they're dealing with psychological issues. Should Lacey be viewed primarily as a perpetrator of a horrific crime or as a mother struggling with untreated mental illness? The dichotomy fuels heated discussions about compassion versus justice. The concept of Munchausen syndrome by proxy complicates this narrative. While recognized, this syndrome can lead to misunderstandings and stigmatization of caregivers, overshadowing their genuine suffering. In Lacey's situation, applying this label influenced legal proceedings and public perception, with some viewing her actions as manipulative while others believed she needed help rather than punishment. Media portrayal also exacerbates the controversy. Sensationalized reporting often emphasizes shocking aspects of Lacey's actions, leading to a simplified narrative that neglects her mental health struggles. This sensationalism skews public opinion, where empathy for mental health challenges is eclipsed by outrage over her crime. Consequently, individuals with similar struggles may face judgment rather than understanding and support. This case raises critical questions about the role of medical professionals in identifying and addressing potential cases of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. The healthcare system frequently lacks the training and the resources to recognize and intervene effectively in such situations. Lacey's case serves as a reminder that individuals suffering from mental illness can fall through the cracks, leading to tragic outcomes. Advocates call for improved training for healthcare providers to identify behaviors that may jeopardize a child's safety. As Lacey Spears' trial concluded, the discussions surrounding her case extended beyond the courtroom. It opened a vital dialogue about mental health, caregiving, and justice. This case challenges us to consider how we define accountability and compassion. Should punishment take precedence for those who cause harm, even amid psychological struggles? Or should understanding and support be prioritized? What do you think? Ultimately, Lacey Spears' case underscores the need for a nuanced understanding of mental illness in caregiving contexts. And it urges society to reflect on how we balance justice and compassion and accountability when those lines are blurred. As we reflect on Lacey Spears' case, it becomes essential to ask, what should be the appropriate response when a caregiver's actions lead to harm? Lacey's story invites us to grapple with challenging questions about the nature of maternal love, mental illness, and accountability. Was Lacey a victim of her own psychological struggles? Or was she a perpetrator who consciously chose to harm her son for the sake of attention? This is not just a question for the jury, but for all of us to consider. Imagine being in a situation where the person meant to nurture and protect you becomes the source of your suffering. How do we reconcile the love a mother is expected to provide with the potential for manipulation and harm? As we dive deeper into the complexities of this case, consider the broader implications for society. What responsibility do we have to support parents like Lacey who may be struggling with mental health issues? Should there be a distinction made between those who commit crimes out of malice and those whose actions are influenced by untreated psychological conditions? The line between empathy and accountability, it can often be blurred, and it leaves us with questions about how to respond. It shed light on the healthcare system. How can it be better? Should mental health services play a more proactive role in these situations? The answers are not straightforward, and the discussion is vital for preventing similar tragedies in the future. Ultimately, Lacey Spears' story serves as a reminder of the difficulties that surround motherhood and mental illness and the societal expectations placed on caregivers. As we conclude this episode, I invite you to weigh the evidence presented and form your own opinion. What does justice look like for a child like Garnett? And how do we ensure that parents receive the help they need before their actions lead to irreversible harm? Your perspective does matter, and it's crucial to consider where we draw the line between compassion and accountability in cases like this. Thank you for joining me in examining Lacey Spears' case. Stay safe out there, guys. Stay out of trouble. Stay curious. And until next time, this is Alexis Knight.